church what ails us. We've got it spread out everywhere. This, that, the other. What ails the human heart is the death that found a way to enter the world. And then the fruit that came forth from death, telling us that we lack life. That caused us to walk in darkness, right?
Yes.
If I think I lack life and I lack godliness, well, God's full of life and He's full of godliness. That will cause my heart to think that I'm the rejected of God. I'm the forsaken of God. I've been orphaned in the earth. I'm going to have to give myself life. Right?
Yeah.
But then God comes and manifests Himself in the midst of our darkness. He shines a great light so that those who are walking in the valley of the shadow of death don't have that death confusing their thoughts about God and their life with God anymore. Because death will confuse you.
Yes.
That's one of the words that it uses with Goliath when it says that the children of Israel were dismayed because Goliath was defying them.
Yeah.
One of the meanings of that word dismay is confusion. So they're filled with confusion.
Sure, right.
Because they had heard they were God's people, but now all of a sudden their nakedness was laid bare. Because they saw they had an inability to overcome Goliath. The problem is, you can't be clothed by your ability anyway. And so not only was David not ashamed of his nakedness, he didn't really see himself as naked.
Yeah.
He said, I'm clothed by the arm of God. I know you think I'm naked because you're judging me by the strength of man. And so according to the strength of man, yeah, I'm naked, but guess what? So are you. And so I know you think I'm naked, but I'm not ashamed that I can't clothe myself because I've seen God Almighty has come and clothed me. And now by strength of His hand, I'm going to come and shut your mouth. Right? But they were confused because Goliath was uncovering their nakedness by pointing at their inability to overcome them. And then, if you really are God's people, why can't you overcome me? And they were like, yeah, what? We can't. How can we be God's people? Do you see the confusion that can come? We can't overcome Him. How can we be God's people? Look at us. We're naked. We don't possess the ability to overcome Him. If we are God's people, where's God now? Do you see the confusion that can come?
Sure.
The fear, the shame. And then David comes. And who is this uncircumcised Philistine? Right?
Yeah, that's right.
And he's basically saying that everything Goliath was speaking was unclean.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
Now, we don't want to just see Goliath doing that to the Israelites. It's a picture of all people. So, all of mankind, what was uncovering our nakedness? Sin and death. It uncovered our nakedness by pointing at our inability to give ourselves life. You following that?
Yep.
Now, picture us as the Israelites now. Sin and death is our Goliath. Pointing at our inability to clothe ourselves with life, uncovering our nakedness, and then we become confused.
Yes.
We say, I must not be the child of God. Look at this death I have in my life. Look at this fruit of death that's going on in my life. I must not be a child of God. I must not be the son or daughter of God. Look at this death I have. And look, I've tried and I've tried and I've tried to clothe myself with life, and I can't. Now the confusion comes.
Right.
Now we feel like we're not the children of God. Now we feel like God's forsaken us and God's left us as orphans in the earth. Because after all, we see death manifesting in our lives, and then every time we try to clothe ourselves with life, we see we bring forth more of the works of the flesh. And so sin is pointing at our inability to clothe ourselves with life, and it's saying, if you are the children of God, why is this fruit in your life? Use your ability. Clothe yourself if you really are the children of God. That's what sin and death was telling us. That was our Goliath. Right?
Yes.
And then God comes as our advocate. God sees us suffering at the hands of sin and death. He sees sin and death uncovering our nakedness, just like it uncovered Adam's nakedness when God came and said, who told you you were naked?
Right.
And then He clothed him. So God sees us suffering at the hands of sin and death. He sees sin and death has uncovered our nakedness. It's pointed at our inability to clothe ourselves with life. And then it's used that to defame us, to tear down our reputation as the children of God, to suggest that we're not the sons and daughters of God. And now we're filled with confusion.
Right.
Now we're filled with fear and shame. And now we're being beaten and bruised by the sin and death that found a way to enter the world through Adam. And we're hanging there like Jesus was on the cross, naked. Right? And then God sees his people, his children, suffering at the hands of sin and death.
Right.
And he comes to be with us to chastise us?
No.
He comes to be with us to punish us?
No.
We're already being punished. He comes to be with us to judge against us? No. He comes to be with us to condemn us? No. He comes to be with us and he stands next to us as we're being shamed for our nakedness, and he speaks against the serpent. He speaks against sin and death. He says, who is this uncircumcised devil that they should speak against mankind?
Amen. I don't know how all you're sitting down. I don't know how you're doing it. Because, man, that's good.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Sin and death tried to defame human. It tried to tear down the reputation of human as the children of God. And the way that it tried to do it was by pointing at our body of death, which is nakedness, and then our inability to clothe ourselves with life. Then we're filled with fear and shame. Right? Now we're filled with confusion. You ever felt that where, like at some point in your Christian walk where you knew you loved God, but you found yourself with some fruit that you knew never came from God manifesting in your life? You felt that fear and that shame? Mm-hmm. You felt what that felt like? Mm-hmm. That's what it's talking about when it says that the children of Israel were dismayed by what Goliath was saying. Right. That's that same thing we felt. Now, God sees us feeling that, and he sees what's causing it, and he comes as our advocate, as our friend, to argue in favor of us as his children. He sees sin and death saying we're not his, and he sees the fear and shame that's causing us, and he comes as our advocate to stand next to us to argue in favor of us being his children. Now listen, that's beautiful. Hold on. I want to finish this up so I can connect this thought and then jump in. And so the argument that God makes in favor of us is Jesus come as a human being, as the last Adam, the representative of all us. Now he took all of our sin and our death into himself. Right. And he hung on the cross. Right. That's us. You want to see yourself in that image. That's how all man was. Naked, unable to clothe themselves with life. And so God come and argued in favor of man as being his children when he came and raised Jesus from the dead and clothed upon him with glory and immortality. Because Paul said, God, the only immortal. Right. And so if all of a sudden now there's a human clothed in immortality, do you know what that's declaring? Mankind is the children of God. Yes. Right? And so God's argument in favor of man as being his people was manifested in the resurrection. Mm-hmm. Sin and death was saying, man is not yours. Look at their body of death. Look at their inability to clothe themselves. They can't possibly be yours. And then the man, the God-man, Christ, in that place wasn't confused by his body of death. He was like David. He wasn't ashamed that he was naked when he hung on the cross. Right. He wasn't ashamed that he wasn't clothed because he said, I can't be clothed by this flesh that's perishing anyhow. I can only be clothed by God. And so he rested on the cross and cried out to God. And that allowed God to raise him up and to declare or to argue in favor of mankind as his people. Because now there could be a human who was clothed in immortality. Right. That was the declaration. Yes. That was his argument in favor of man being his people. That was him upholding our reputation. Mm-hmm. It was him defending our honor, defending our dignity. Yeah. Right? Yeah. In the resurrection. Sure. And he shut the mouth of sin and death in the resurrection because case closed. This man has immortality
That's right.
in a physical body.
That's right.
He's not just a Casper. They touched him.
That's right.
They ate food with him.
Right.
This man who had the sin and death of everybody on himself and ended up dead in the grave, this man has now come out of the grave clothed in the glory and immortality of God. That can only mean one thing. Man has come from God.
Yeah.
Man has been cut from the rock that is God. And so he came and argued in favor of us. Now, all those that see God with us like that, what happens is they find their hearts being guarded from the word of Goliath in the earth. Right? You find that God with us, that revelation, you find it dwelling in your heart and shutting the mouth of anything that tries to speak against you.
Yeah.
Right? So maybe I'm driving down the road and I get upset and somebody cuts me off. And I find myself carrying on for like 5 minutes. Like, what the heck is wrong? I know it's only me. No one else gets upset. But you find yourself carrying on like, what are they thinking? And then all of a sudden, there's that still small voice that ain't God's or yours telling you, well, if you really were a Christian, how come you're yelling at them?
Ah, right.
You're supposed to love one another. Mm-hmm. Now all of a sudden, God with me wells up in my heart and shuts the mouth of that accusation. Right? It condemns it.
Right.
And then you walk peacefully. Sorry, James.
Go ahead, James.